left, but I can tell you the one thing y'all are very fortunate about is there's not going to be a test. But in his defense, he was saying the same thing 30 years ago that he told me today. And I think as I got into this side of the business, I may have discovered a little bit of the problem. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. My purpose today is to kind of relate to you some of the things we've learned in the last 7 years since we've been processing cattle and keeping performance data as we need, and that's strictly carcass information. And I'll try to relate a little bit that to you, some of the observations I might have, and try to relate that back to how it would work to your advantage. Before I do that, I need to tell you just a little bit about what we do, because I'm not sure everybody sometimes really understands how our business model works, or doesn't work sometimes. We are a sort of integrated operation, but not totally. This is kind of a diagram for a supply chain. I'm sorry you can't see better. But basically, this is how a calf or an animal goes through this system. Okay, a cow-calf operator raises a calf, sells that calf in normal course of business. Okay, that might be through an auction barn, might be through a background operator, or might choose to retain ownership in that calf. We don't get involved in that decision. A feedlot, which we have a cooperating agreement, okay, ends up either purchasing that animal or feeding that animal for the guy who owns it. And a lot of times, people feeding cattle in these feed yards are investors who are just feeding cattle for other benefits they might get from that. And then there are also ranchers who retain ownership and feed cattle, and then the feedlots feed cattle. It all depends on the particular situation. There's 5 feed yards that are cooperators with Nolan Ryan Beef at the moment. That feedlot then feeds them to our specifications, which I'll show you a little bit more about, and then he offers them for sale to the packer as Nolan Ryan eligible cattle. Okay. Again, we are not involved in that. We don't buy cattle. That's probably the one reason we're still in business, as opposed to a lot of our competitors. We don't take possession until later in the process. That feedlot sells that animal to Sam Kane in this case. Sam Kane purchased that animal on some kind of basis, which I'll tell you a little bit about, and processes the cattle to our specifications using our unique way of doing that, which I'll show you. And then we take possession of the meat. Right here is where we get involved financially. We purchase the beef to fill our order. Okay, so if there was 300 head met the specification that week, we might need 300 head worth of ribeyes, 220 head worth of strip loins, 400 head worth of chuck rolls that we didn't get. In other words, we're just able to purchase what we need to fill our order. We take it to a warehouse. We age it ourselves, we own it at that point, and then we sell it to food service and retail customers. Okay? So we don't actually financially get involved in this whole process until the animal is dead and has met our specifications. We do have some cost with the feedlot, and that's because we have to pay them to do some of the things that they do for us that are unique. And I'll try to go over that with you a little bit. It's a USDA certified program, okay? CAB is a certified program. That means that there's a third-party auditor, USDA, to make sure we are doing what we say we're doing. I know you can't see this, but I'll hit the key points with it. In order to become eligible for our program, the cattle first have to go to a feed yard where they have agreed not to give the cattle any growth implants within 100 days of harvest, okay? They can't receive any antibiotics within 100 days of harvest. Okay, and they have to feed a high level of vitamin E. Now, you guys have probably heard all this field before. I'm not going to go into why we do all those things. If you have questions about that later, ask me. But if I talk about that, I won't get to what maybe you might be more interested in today. Okay, then that feed yard sells to the packers. I told you, the packer has to use high voltage electrical stimulation. We have a 14-day aging program where we don't release it to our customers unless the product's aged. The margin score we're looking for in this program today is from slight 0 to slight 100, which is a select grade animal. Okay? Yield grade, and this is incorrect. I did this about 11 o'clock last night. I apologize, but it's 2.9 or less. We're using yield grade 1s and 2s. And the carcass weight range is from 600 to 899. Okay? Those are the carcass weights. So anything that's, and we also have a ribeye spec, where if the ribeye is smaller than 11 square inches, larger than 16 and a half square inches, those cattle get kicked out. So we're trying to get a set of cattle out of the larger population that weighs carcass weight between 600 pounds and 899 pounds, yield grade 1 or 2, has a ribeye area of 11 square inches to 16 and a half square inches, and is tender. That's basically what we're looking for. Okay, so that eliminates a lot of cattle. I'll show you kind of how that works. This is a typical day at San Cane where we process actually this was a Swift, same thing, works either way. This day we killed 1,300 head that were eligible for the program. Okay? 1,155 of them were within the carcass weight range that I described to you. So we lost that many right there. T certified means that they were determined by the instrument we use to predict tenderness, and I'll show you that in a minute, to be tender. Okay, so that day, 838 of them were predicted to be tender, and it's a little more complicated than that. These T certified cattle were predicted to be tender, but were also within the carcass weight range we were looking for. So some of those were tender, but they were too big or too small. Okay. All right, yield grade, this is where we lose the biggest number. Okay, this is at Swift, and I'll show you why that's interesting. This is at the Swift plant in Dumas, Texas, Japan. But we lose a bunch, down to 433 left after we do that. Okay, which ones were tender, or yield grade 1s and 2s, were in the ribeye area, and were in the carcass weight range. There were 380 out of these 1,300 we started with. Okay. And so we got 20% of those cattle that graded select that make our specification. There were another 125 that day that graded choice and made our specification. Okay. We don't currently have a choice program, but if we were, we could use those cattle as well. So it's a larger population sorting out a smaller population that meets a certain parameter that we know is very acceptable to the consumer and that we can sell. So if you own cattle in this process, now that doesn't mean that the producer has to be the producer. As I said, it could be the feedlot operator, it could be the guy that just invests with the feedlot operator, it could be the packer, that's often the case. If you own cattle in this process, what's important to your profitability? So that's really what we're talking about here. Probably the single most important thing is health. Prevention of morbidity, death loss. And I'm not going to talk to you about all that there. We've got a huge extension service and lots of qualified veterinarians, and we've made huge progress in that area because of DNA. We can now take the DNA of these different bugs, so we can really zero in on where they came from, how we got them, and design viruses, antiviruses, and inoculate these cattle against preventing these problems. But from here down, you have a lot to say about what happens with these areas. That's feedlot performance, carcass yield, and carcass performance. So let's talk about feedlot performance. Well, what the single biggest factor, whether you make money feeding cattle, other than if they die, is how efficient they are. How much feed it takes to get a pound of game. Feed efficiency is a huge issue in the feed yard. It's going to be even a more huge issue as we move forward. Fortunately, beef master cattle and Brahman influenced cattle are really good at this. Okay, we know, and we've always known, when you think about it, that our cattle are pretty easy to get fat, and they do well on minimal nutrition. So we have an advantage here. That's why feeders like to feed Brahman influenced cattle and particularly beef master cattle. They're easy keeping cattle. That means they can do more with less. Okay. Growth post-weaning, which is what you heard some stuff about today. Okay, how an animal grows from the time it's weaned till the time it's killed is a huge factor in profitability. Because obviously, if they can gain 3 pounds a day, they're making more money for that guy quicker than if they gain 2 pounds a day, because he had to spend the same amount of money on both cattle. So if he can identify which one is going to gain 3 pounds a day, he'll know how to manage that animal differently, and he can have a more profitable animal. Environmental adaptability is big. And I think we're going to see more and more impact of that as we see the impact of freight.